Hi lovely people, it's Candy here, back with a VR to Kasha over at Tarot Map and Patrick at the Living Wheel, who have invited us to share our formative decks, so decks that have been important to us in our tarot practice. Now, when I first heard about this tag, I wasn't initially going to do it because I thought, I'm so new to tarot, I'm only a year in, I surely don't have any formative decks or enough to say about this. But if there's one thing that the tarot has taught me in the last 12 months, it's to go a bit easier on myself and to understand that my opinion and my ideas about things, they are important. I do have a voice, even a voice for the formative decks, the decks that have formed and shaped my initial year within tarot. It's a different perspective, yes, to somebody that's been in the tarot for say 20-30 years, of course it is, but it's still it's still a valuable and worthwhile contribution that I should own. The tarot for me has been incredibly healing. When I first thought, oh no, I can't do that, the tarot gave me a slap on the hand, if I'm honest, and reminded me about all I've learned about self-worth, self-esteem, owning my own voice and my own opinions. And so I'm doing it. Formative decks for somebody that's 1 year in. So formative deck number one has to be my first ever tarot deck, which is Kim Cran's The Wild Unknown. Now this deck shows my link between my step from my lifetime art practice into tarot and how one is an extension of the other. They are absolutely linked. I've always used images and lines and patterns and colour for self-development, for clarification of things, for working through issues. So for me, discovering tarot just felt like an extension of my art practice, no more so than in my my very first tarot deck, which was this one. Now this came into my life after a FaceTime call with my best friend. And I had just mentioned that somebody had said they were surprised that I'd never got into tarot. And my best friend said, oh, I've just bought a tarot deck. She had a few which I didn't even know. And she went and got it, and it was this one. And she was showing me some images on the phone. And she didn't know how to read tarot at the time. And she said, oh, let's do a little reading. And we pulled some cards over FaceTime. Absolutely intuitively, we pieced together a reading that had us both floored and in tears. And that was just using the lines and the colours and the images that we could see. We had no idea of the meanings of the cards at that point. We literally purely just used the imagery and read intuitively, and it made me realize that there was no leap really for me, that I could immediately get this deck and start having really profound and moving experiences with it. So I ordered it immediately and I just love it. So it was my open door into the world of tarot. It was the deck that said, you've been doing this for years. It was the deck that said, this isn't a leap into something new for you. This is you coming home. My first formative deck. So my next formative deck was prompted then by wanting to step into understanding the tarot more. I bought this book to learn the meanings. Even though I was reading the cards by that point intuitively, I thought, no, I want to know the meanings as well. So I bought this book, which is absolutely brilliant, and saw all of these images. Also Tarot 101, I read and learned that there were different systems. There was this Rider-Waite Smith system, there was Thoth, there was Marseille. So those two books combined led me to think, right, I want to get a study deck, and I decided to go with the Rider-Waite Smith deck because the images were the same as this book. So I went down to my local metaphysical shop and they had this in stock. This would be my second formative deck, my link into tarot study, my open door in to learn the meanings. This is the original Rider-Waite Tarot deck. It's the one with these backs. It's got a very, very muddy printing, which isn't my favourite at all, but at this point I thought that this was the only Rider-Waite Smith deck available. I didn't realise that there were different versions. It would take me discovering Tarot Tube to learn that, and at this point I still hadn't discovered Tarot Tube at this point. This deck I used for study, but it's also a deck that my father's voice started to come through. As I'm flicking through these cards, I can feel it, and it's making me realise that I need to keep these cards out at the minute. So this deck is very precious to me because it's a deck that made me realise that tarot could be studied, yes, but it was also a portal through to ancestors, to loved ones, to other worlds. It became my doorway into the spiritual, mystical, magical side of tarot, rather than just being a link to my artwork and a way of self-development. This brought a spiritual dimension in, as well as the official meanings of the cards. So I love it for that. This was a really important formative deck for me. So now I've got my art practice linked to tarot and intuitive reading. I've got a tarot study going and an understanding that this tarot in front of me is magical, it's mystical, it's portals to the spiritual realm, to ancestors, to magic. And then I discover Tarot Tube, and I discover that this is not the only Rider-Waite deck, and there are thousands of other decks available. And through discovering Tarot Tube, I discover this deck. This was the first deck that I bought that felt like a splurge into collecting. I bought it because I loved the colours in there. I bought it because it was one of the first decks I saw on Tarot Tube, and it was the deck that I did my first walkthrough of when I first started my channel. It was so beautiful. I just wanted to share it. Buying this deck made me feel like a collector and made me brave enough to take my channel, which at the time was purely a visual diary for myself for my garden, with no real concept of any audience watching, into a step towards a tarot channel where I shared more about my life and my loves and audience. The thought that people might watch also became part of it. So this deck kind of shaped me into collecting. It introduced me to a huge tarot community that I love. It opened the doorway to me to content create, and it was really formative in getting more involved in the tarot community, which just only heightened my love of tarot even more. So the Muse Tarot, the deck that made me want to collect, the deck that introduced me to Tarot Tube, the deck that whispered in my ear, go on, create some content, my very first flip through deck. So I found Tarot Tube, I found some channels, I'm watching deck flip throughs, I'm joining tarot groups on other social media platforms, and in one of those Facebook tarot groups, somebody posts some pictures of a really unusual deck, which is my next formative deck, Tarot of the Sweet Twilight. This is the deck that taught me that you can connect with decks on a soul level, that some decks inexplicably creep in and wrap you in an embrace that means that you just can't put them down. This deck taught me about soul decks. This deck taught me about reaching for a deck just to shuffle it with no intent to read with it, just because this deck taught me about tarot connecting on a really deep soul level, a love affair, if you will, a love affair with the deck. I began to understand how decks could feel like friends. This wasn't just about collecting for the pretty pictures or the artwork. It wasn't about a study or studying. It wasn't just about having another deck. This deck was a warm embrace, a hug, a soul deck. So Tarot of the Sweet Twilight taught me the depths that tarot can enter and how important tarot can become. So I'm lost in study and watching videos and having all those magical rabbit holes open up with things to learn, and trying not to get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of things I want to know and want to know yesterday. And then a deck came into my life that reminded me more than any other deck that actually your studying is really important, but never forget you are an intuitive reader. And that deck is my soul cards deck. It makes it easy because it has no guidebook, it has no meanings. This is soul card 1. It is purely designed to be read completely intuitively, and it just reminded me how natural for me that process is, that's how I read it. It's what I've always done with my art. Piecing this deck with other decks as well and partnering it up put new meanings into my tarot decks that I was learning meanings of, and the soul card pulled with a tarot meaning would transform an entire reading. This deck taught me that intuition over anything feels right for me, and I absolutely love this deck for that. I think there's magic in this deck. I think there is a whole new world of meaning once you pull this deck out and use it to be explored. I love it. My soul cards deck, the deck that reminded me that intuition for me is a huge part of my tarot practice. The next deck is one I won, the Raincoast Pocket Tarot by Christoph James. I was lucky enough to win this deck, and Christoph sent it to me. But this deck was really important to me because it taught me that sometimes you need to change the meanings of a deck, that you can create your own language for a deck. It was so important for me, this deck, because it completely mirrored for me my history It's a deck that screamed the stories of my past back at me, my traumas, the things that I'm healing from. That story spoke louder than the Rider-Waite meanings that should really be in the cards. It took the shoulds out of tarot and said firmly to me, no, if you need to change the language, you change the language. This deck taught me that this is my tarot, it's my rules, and if I see something that screams from the cards that nobody else can see, then that's what I should listen to. This deck taught me to own my own practice, to own my own language coming out of the cards, and to trust myself to know the message. So that's the Raincoast Pocket Tarot, the deck that taught me to trust my own gut, to hear the correct message, regardless of what books might tell me the message should say. And the next deck taught me that I like to break the rules with tarot, and that's the Dreams of Gaia Tarot. Now, when I realised that this deck had its own system, the excitement that I felt was off the scale, and it's an excitement that I feel on repeat every time I discover a deck that I hear people say, oh, but it's got its own system. Whereas some people shy away from that, I find myself running to decks that have their own system and go their own way over and over and over again. I think that's linked to the fact that I do read intuitively. And there's a great big crow looking at me through the window as I'm speaking. Funny that, because there's a crow on the card. Yeah, this deck, the excitement that I felt with this deck just really brought it home to me that I do like things that are different. I do like decks that break the system. I do like to let go of set systems and set rules and set meanings. And again, like I said, I think it links to the fact that I do read images and colours and pattern quite intuitively. So this deck just pointed that out really clearly to me. So that's the Dreams of Gaia Tarot. The next deck was my first venture into indie decks, and it was a lesson in how much the tarot can heal. There is no way at the start of my tarot practice that I would have told myself I was worth it enough to buy an indie deck. This is a deck that I saved up for and bought for my birthday, and I couldn't believe I'd bought it. I couldn't believe I'd spent that much money on me, and it really was a lesson in the healing power of tarot. It was also the first indie deck I ever bought myself, and that's the Luminous Void Tarot. So it opened up quite an expensive door for me, because now I've got to the point where I don't think it would even need to be my birthday to buy myself an indie deck. I have learnt over the last year that I am worth it. We're all worth it. We all have inherent value at our core. We do have a right to nice things and to follow our dreams and to put ourselves at the top of our own priority lists, if not every day, at least sometimes. So this deck was really powerful for me to buy on lots of levels, and I do really love it. It's the smaller of the two decks because I've got really small hands, I love the soft, gentle watercolours of this deck. I think it's incredibly beautiful. Yeah, so the Luminous Void Tarot, another formative deck for me. And then staying on the healing journey, another indie deck that taught me just how profoundly the tarot or oracle, or just decks in general can speak into very personal aspects of healing. And this is the Iris Oracle, which I bought secondhand, and I bought it because some of the cards in here are so unbelievably pertinent to aspects of my psyche that still need to heal. When I saw this deck, I absolutely knew without fail that it was a deck that I needed to work with. It was a deck that I needed to use to heal the parts of me that I was still really struggling to heal. It made me realise that I've got to the point where I do see tarot as a profoundly healing, sacred space full of soul medicine. And this deck, more than any that I own, sum that up. Like I say, when I saw this deck, I just knew without a shadow of a doubt that if I could find a way to bring this deck into my collection, because it no longer ships to the UK, that I needed to do it. And I got an opportunity to do just that. So the tarot as a healing, safe space, a therapist, a healing ear and soul medicine. The Iris Oracle deck taught me that. My final formative deck, a deck that taught me the pure magic that can be held within a deck. The fact that tarot is a key element of my spiritual witchcraft practice. That's the Weaver's Oracle. This is one of the most profoundly nurturing decks that I own, but it's the most magical deck I own. It does feel like sacred ground, this deck. I can't even explain the experiences I've been having with this deck since I started working with it at the start of the year. If any deck has taught me that tarot is part of my spiritual life and my spiritual path forward, if any deck has shown me that it can hold the power of witchcraft and the elements and story, it's this deck. This deck is profoundly important in my tarot practice and my witchcraft practice. It is profoundly important to my creative practice as well. It affects me on many levels and I love it. This is a deck that tells me about the powerhouse of tarot and the endless possibilities within tarot, and I love it. So the Weaver's Oracle is my last formative deck. So thank you to Patrick and to Kasha for a lovely tag to join in with. Thank you to Masha and to Laura as well, whose videos I will link below, who encouraged me to own my voice as a newbie to tarot and to join in. I am very appreciative of that. And thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye.